So, please welcome the most important guest today, Monty, who is the founder of the MySQL, a company that does not need to be presented. I think all of you use MySQL every day, or at least sometimes. He sold the MySQL to Sun for $2 billion a few years ago. One! Hey! And later it was acquired by Oracle, but this is a different story, and Monty could explain why he founded MariaDB Foundation to create a new fork or version or style of MySQL. Welcome, Monty.
So, good morning, everyone. This is my second time in Sofia, and I'm happy to be here. So, these are the questions I will address in the talk. Basically, why I become an entrepreneur, why I created MySQL, why MariaDB is needed, and so on. So, I have worked on MySQL for 25 years, and PHP is very closely related to MySQL because PHP was one of the products who made MySQL successful. It's a long project. On the project, I've been coding 34 years, and now MariaDB is 6 years. I'm by soul an entrepreneur and a coder, and that makes me a little bit unique in the open source environment. First, a little bit about the early days and my family. So this is my daughter, MY, who gave the name of the MySQL project. One of the reasons I wanted to work with open source was not only to give something back to the community, also that if you're successful, you get to go and travel to a lot of interesting places, like Sofia. So here we are in Madagascar in '99, and this person had never seen a blonde small girl before. I've been working from home since 1982. I love the fact that virtual companies work and you can create a big organization from anywhere. Yesterday I was talking with some of my friends here, and they said that it's so hard to create an international company from Bulgaria. I said that's as hard as creating an international company from Finland. It's just that if you have the right idea, you can do that. In the beginning, we're good. We did grow pretty rapidly. I also have a son, Max, and we also had a project, MaxDB, so that his name will come out. And we also have a MySQL Max and version of the database. And we also have now a max scale proxy for MySQL and MariaDB. When you create a company and things grow, you get investors, you get some growing pains, and you don't know really how things should go forward. And those who know the MySQL story, that was a little bit said here, we came into some strange company, and some of us got a little bit scared that what will happen now. But fortunately, when with open source, when something goes wrong with some base project, there's usually somebody who can continue. Me, my daughter, she has been traveling around the world. No SQL anymore. You don't need MySQL. While MariaDB is the next generation. The question, it's really hard to take over success. MySQL is one of the most known trademarks in the open source world. And the question is that when you start a new project, can you actually replace it? It's a really hard job to take over something success, especially when you have created it before. It's a little bit like pulling out a rabbit out of a hat. Before I started coding, I always wanted to be a magician. So in this case, that's why I like this picture. But we are pretty confident that we have a good team, that we can pull it off. By the way, I have been forbidden to show this picture in the US because people get so upset about a girl with a gun. But that's not the point. Look at her face. She can handle anything. And that's the spirit of a true entrepreneur. You don't give up when things goes bad. You just keep on fighting. Not with guns in this case, we fight with code, better code. So I was meeting your president yesterday. It was very fascinating when he started to talk about how he started coding Fortran and so on. When I started in '78, the first computer I could get my hands on, I had 8K of RAM and 4 megahertz, and I thought I could do anything. So but back then there were no programs for a computer, so I programmed everything myself. So I learned coding by copying popular arcade games and so on. Then I upgraded the computer, and then I started to write word processor, hard disk controllers, basically learn everything about the computers. And that's something I find very sad today, that when you get a computer, you have too much programs, so you can already start using them, instead of what we did in the good old days. You basically had to learn everything about the computer to use it wisely. And with 32K memory, I wrote a word processor that could handle any size text documents. I don't think you can find any program at 32K today that can do something similar. We just coded things, in some ways, better back then. So when you're an entrepreneur and want to see that how you want to be a success, the best way is to learn from your environment. I was coding, actually moving things from COBOL, from big mainframes to, back then, Microsoft Basic, and noticed that lots of the programs were similar. And I thought that this is kind of a waste of time, that when you do a bookkeeping program or payroll, 99% is the same, and then you adjust some differences. So I wrote a program where you just paint on the database on the screen, how the screen should look like. It automatically created the database, and then you could start working with it. And it's the same thing with reports. And that becomes this Unireg program that I did, worked for basically between 82 and 94. Develop it as a consulting firm, adapting it for customers, and actually working on big data. Back then, big data was 4 million rows a month, and we did that for some of the biggest gas station chains in Sweden. But basically adapting the whole time. And then our customers said that they want to have access to the database from SQL, actually from the web. I did some research, noted that SQL is a very good language for retrieving information, so I wrote an SQL interface on this Unireg and renamed it MySQL in '94. We released it in '95 under dual licensing. I will come back to that later, because that was one of the innovations that made MySQL possible. So the first when things went bad the first time was when Oracle bought InnoDB in 2005. The only reason they bought us, they wanted to stop the project. So InnoDB is one of the motors in MySQL. But that didn't stop us from being sold 3 years later for $1 billion. Unfortunately, not 2. But $1 billion, that is a good start. So I joined Sun, but there were some people in the development who didn't like the feel of a big company. So me and some other people left Sun to work on the Maria engine to replace InnoDB, because Sun didn't want to be dependent on Oracle. But of course, things changed dramatically when Oracle started to acquire Sun in 2009. And instead of working on an engine, me and other developers started to work on MariaDB, because Oracle never has given any promises of what's the future of MySQL. Will they continue to develop it? Will it always be open source? And as you have seen, MySQL is not open source anymore, it's open core. So some pieces you have actually to buy for. So I created the foundation in 2012, and we were working Monty program AB. We merged with SkySQL in 2013, and then 2 years ago we renamed everything to MariaDB Corporation. I will go into some of the details later. So one of the questions I get, so why did I release MySQL as open source in '96? Before that, me and David Axmark, the other founder of MySQL, we had worked with free software for some 10 years. We always wanted to give something back. But one of the mistakes people made early on with open source was they released everything open source, and then they never had a business model around it. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to spend full time coding and providing something better. And for that, you need to have a business model, so you don't have to do what people back then did. And even now does. There's a little bit of support around an open source module, and then they have a real job to be able to make their wife and children happy that for some strange reason like to have money to eat. So we come up with the idea that we could release MySQL under 2 licenses. One that is free for most, but for those who doesn't want to be open source, they actually have to pay for the same software, identical, to be able to use it with the project. And the GPL license is the perfect license for that, because GPL says that you can use it freely in-house in any way you want, but if you want to distribute your product with the GPL, your product also has to be GPL. And there are lots of companies like Adobe who didn't want to release their Adobe software as open source. They paid us to get a license to the same code. And this was something that nobody has thought about before, especially with GPL. So if I give a lot of talks about how to make money with open source. And if you have something that is infrastructure, something that is embeddable, like a library, into something else that people want to distribute, then dual licensing is the perfect way to go to ensure that you actually have a business plan and you can get investors and you can survive. But the problem is nowadays is that there's lots of end-user products like OpenOffice and all the apps on the phone that is not embeddable. And then dual licensing doesn't work. So then nowadays I'm advocating something we call the business source license, that is a combination of closed source and open source that solves the issue. Because when I got money from Sun, I'm still working with coding, I'm still working with the MariaDB project, both leading it and coding it, but I've also created an investment company, Open Ocean Capital, and we invest into a lot of companies. I get lots of companies coming to us and saying, we have this great open source business model that we want to use. And if we can't be sure that they can actually force a small portion of the users to pay, it's impossible for investors to go in and invest money into them. So business source license was created to allow us to invest more. So we started in '95 with David, 2 persons, and we grew very quickly to 15 people. We were all developers, no salespeople, no marketing, no lawyers, and we were virtual from day one. And I think also that was one of the success parts of MySQL, that we were virtual, so we could hire the best people everywhere. MariaDB today is also virtual. We are 80 people spread all over the world, and we meet twice a year in different places to connect. So the first years we spent to get the MySQL name out, I was home, actually sitting in the cellar, coding, while David Axmark went out and held talks all over the world. After the third year of the MySQL, it was in '99, we were started to be approached by investors. And one of the big decisions for entrepreneurs when should you take money from investors. We got the offer of 50 million in 99. In that case, it was only me and David who were the shareholders, so it would have been a good sale. But we were not there not only for the money. It's good to earn money, but we actually wanted to do something that could change the world, both with open source business and we thought we are not ready. We didn't want to lose all control at once because these companies or investors, they wanted to buy everything. We thought that we are not ready. So we spent in total 5 years developing MySQL on my old code base until we thought it was good enough. And the breaking point for me was that in 2000, I was managing 15 people, handling all the payrolls, everything, and also did the coding. And we started to get competition like Postgres, who then had added a SQL interface on their old product. So we had three choices. We could continue to grow slowly, which is a good business model if you just have a small group and you don't have too ambition, you just want to live a good life. Nothing wrong with that. We were there to change the world with open source and show that you actually can make money on open source. So we were not willing to sell. And the third option was to take in investors, which we did. I called Morten Mikkos and said, one friend from college, are you free for joining us? And he said he was. And then we hired him, and then we let him talk to investors and find a good investor who only wanted to get a small piece of us. Because the problem with investors, they usually want to have especially American investors, have a big share, like 50% of the company. For a founder, that is absolutely a disaster because you lose control at once, and you also lose a big part of the profit. So one of the really good things we did with MySQL was that we waited so long with investors that in the end, we didn't have to search for investors. They basically was calling us once a week and giving us better offer. And in the end, we took an investor who only wanted to have 10% of the company, so we could have control the longer run. So when you take investors, you always have to have a plan to how should the investors get their money back. So we decided internally that we will go public, and we were very prepared to go public in 2008, but then Morten Mikkos, rightly so, decided that it's better for us to be sold to Sun than to go public, which I was very happy with, because Sun was, in my opinion, the perfect company to acquire MySQL. Because when you're an entrepreneur, and especially one like me, when you have spent more than 20 years on the project, you want to see that your virtual child gets a good home. And Sun did understand open source. I thought they would be able to fix some of the internal issues we had in MySQL when we were growing. And they also did understand to develop open source. They didn't understand how to promote and use open source to make a better company. And I thought that I could make a difference by joining Sun. But then Oracle came. There were a lot of the developers in the MySQL main core group who didn't think that Oracle was what they had signed up to, that should be the endpoint of MySQL. And I wanted to ensure that MySQL could survive whatever happens. And I also wanted to keep the MySQL group together, and a group of really, really talented developers that I worked a long time with. So I wanted to save the people, instead save the developers, ensure that they would have a good place to work on a product that they liked for the rest of their life. I wanted to ensure that MySQL would always be free, whatever happens. So in 2009, after I left Sun, we started to work on MariaDB. And we created a company to make it that was totally virtual from the start, which was very nice because all the employees from Oracle could just join us. They didn't have to move or anything. And we only considered to be a very technical company. And I was part of funding SkySQL, who was a support company. So they did the support for MySQL and MariaDB, and we did the back support in Monty Program AB. And we also used something that I created with Zach Grant many years ago, the hacking business model, where the company is owned by employers. All the rules for the hacking business model you can find on the net. And if anybody of you are planning to start a company of equals, where everybody should be treated equally, and then you have the rules out there. And when in Monty Program AB, we follow those rules to the letter. So when we hired a person, we said that here's your title, here's your salary, and here what we expect from you. All of the rules is on the net under the hacking business model. And we heard about lots of other companies who are following that. And in the end, when we sold Monty Program AB to SkySQL, all the developers got equal shares in the new company, including me. We were all treated equally. So we have the MariaDB Corporation, which is kind of a future of MySQL. Because most of the people, we have some 80 employees, most of those people come from the MySQL environment. We have some 20 engineers working on MariaDB. Actually, I think we're close to 30 now. And on the server, we are some 20 people. Then we also have the MariaDB Foundation, who has 4 people working on it. So we have the best MySQL engineers and MariaDB engineers in the world working on this one. And the corporation is the biggest driver of the MariaDB project. But I didn't want what happened to MySQL ever happen to MariaDB again. And I didn't want to have more children. I think MariaDB probably the last one. And if I create a new database, I would need to have a new child, which makes things a little bit complex. So I created the MariaDB Foundation. And the foundations own the repository of the MariaDB, which means that if somebody would buy the MariaDB Corporation, still it's a foundation who ensures that everybody can still contribute to MariaDB. And that's the biggest fault that Oracle did with MySQL. Only people at Oracle can contribute to MySQL. It's a dead project from the community, and that also means that it's a dead project from all practical purposes, because nobody can affect it without doing a fork. In MariaDB, that can never happen. So this is guaranteed to be free. We have 3 developers, actually 4, including me, working on the project. And what we do that the corporation doesn't do, we work with the community. We ensure that anybody who has a patch to MariaDB get the patch reviewed. We help them improve it, and then we get it into the project. And I don't know of any other open source project that is so active with the community as we are. And these are the companies who helped me creating the foundation and also helping me getting salaries to them, people who work in the foundations. So these actually are the ones who made MariaDB possible. So we are Booking.com, MariaDB Corporation, Odin, Visma, and Automatic. And we are searching for more sponsors. So if any of you want to ensure that your business that is depending on MySQL or MariaDB can continue, please sponsor what we are doing. So that was kind of the entrepreneur part of the track. The rest is about MariaDB. So how many here are using MySQL? Okay, and MariaDB. Okay, so that's still 1/3. That's good. So we had 2/3 of confused developers of what you should use for the future. I hope I will be able to get you to see this straight. So where can you get MariaDB? Currently, all distributions for Linux or major ones, are distributed to MariaDB. Most of them has ditched MySQL, and if you just install a database, you will get MariaDB as default. So what are we? So we are 100% compatible binary replacement of MySQL on the protocol and on the storage, which means that you can just uninstall MySQL, add MariaDB instead, and everything will work. And usually much better. It's much easier to upgrade from MySQL to MariaDB than from MySQL to MySQL, because MySQL add a lot of things that are incompatible between releases. We don't do that. We're extremely careful to not remove any features that people are using. We have more storage engine, more features, better code quality, because we have the best people who ever worked on MySQL are working on MariaDB. We are also much more open, because instead of having GPL connectors that forces your application to become GPL, we have LGPL connectors. We're also doing much more releases than MySQL. So during the last 6 years, we have done 7 releases. And the alpha that we are working on now is coming out around in December. We also have a multi-master mesh network called Galera included into MariaDB 10.1. Anybody using Galera here? One. So Galera allows you to have lots of MariaDB servers and give you higher availability, because if any of the servers goes down, you still have all the data in the previous ones. And it ensures that the transaction that you're doing here is automatically updated here at commit time. So you can send your queries to any of the servers in the network, and you get, in this case, you get higher, much higher read speed, and write speed is about 10 to 30 or 40% better. But it gives you scaling and high availability. So for those who are still using MySQL, if you move to MariaDB, you don't only get the new things that you have in the latest version. You get a lot of other extremely useful features. Most of those are just to increase performance, but also more. So each of these releases is basically taken 1 year to do. So I have just taken the highlights here. You have the virtual columns, which allows you to do NoSQL within MariaDB, but you can do it type safe, which is much better. We have a lot more statistics. The full optimizer team moved from Sun to MariaDB, so we have a much better optimizer and especially much better replication. So in 10.0, we added multi-source and parallel replication. And when you move it from MySQL to MariaDB, if you use the replication, you get a huge speed up. In 10.1, we added Galera, the multi-master network. We added also strong encryption, so you can be sure that not even the DBA who is working on the server can access your data. We are now working on 10.2. We are adding windowing functions, JSON, time machine. Time machine will allow you to, if you have a replication set up, you have a master and many slaves, you can have one of the slaves as a time machine, one option, and that allows you to go back in time since you started the time machine to any point in time. For example, to recovering lost tables or see that what happened at this point in time. So the new features that we have in the latest one, we have an analyze type statement that shows you what happened when you did a query. Normally in MySQL you do explain, and then you see that what is going to happen. Now you can also see what can happen. We have better replication because Galera, but you also do optimistic parallel replication, so that the slave is trying to execute things that we are coming and doing those parallels. Booking.com did a test where they had 500 threads running replication, and they get a speed up even up to that point. I don't have that much time, so I will be very quick with some of the slides. I still like the set statement because it allows you to set variables just for the duration of a query. So you can do a set statement, the maximum time a statement should run, and then you have a select. So you can set any variables just for short duration. You also can do on the command line, you can do if, then, create, and things to make scripts very easy. One of the new features that we are just announced is MariaDB column store, which is based on InfiniDB and CalPoint code. We had it, or the corporation had it before on MySQL 5.1. Now it's moving to MariaDB 10.1 and should be available in March. And this gives you massive parallel and capability to process very complex analytical queries. And of course, it will be open source. So if anybody of you are using MySQL 5 or earlier, if you run replication, you have a problem that MySQL doesn't scale. And that's one of the reasons why the NoSQL movement actually started. They said that SQL databases doesn't scale, and we need something new. But actually, there was a bug in a DB code where it couldn't do group commits. So Facebook tried to fix it, and then they asked us to fix it in MariaDB, and we get a 10x scaling compared to what MySQL was before. The parallel slave just showed that the more worker threads you add on the slave, the more performance you get. So MySQL would be basically there if you're looking at 5.5 or even 5.6. They have done some improvements in 5.7 that I haven't benchmarked, but still this shows some of the work we have done. So you can get 10x speed up by just moving to MariaDB if you're running replication. And this one shows that we have solved the biggest problem that existed in MySQL, which is that the slave are not able to keep up with the master. So this is where you add more and more threads, and on the slave, and here you have on the performance on the master. And to get to, if you are at 100%, then the slave is able to keep up. So in many cases, the slave is faster than the master because it actually has less to do. But when you come up with 8 threads on the slave, then it's able to keep up with the master. So I will not talk so much about NoSQL, but except to say that we are working on adding functions to allow those who like the NoSQL paradigm that you can just add more columns at will. We already have functions for that, but the dynamic columns, but we're also adding in 10.2 full JSON support with indexes and everything. And dynamic columns is something we had since MySQL 5.3. It gives you the same functionality as JSON, but it's type safe. So instead of just adding more information in JSON format that's in text, in this case, the database knows that this part is a date, this is a column, this is an integer, so you can get a checking that you're actually doing things right. And that's the biggest problem with NoSQL databases. You don't know until much later is your information correct or not. So and that's one reason I don't like NoSQL, at least not when using with JSON. So we added also a new thread pool, which something that Oracle made closed source. We had that in MySQL 5.1. Oracle removed that and added that only to Oracle MySQL Enterprise. So by adding the optional using a pool of threads, you had the problem that if you have lots of users, MySQL performance drops because every connection is using a thread, and all your CPU power goes to thread switching. If you instead of only have a small pool of threads, some twice the number of cores you have, then you get avoid the problem that you get much more, or the CPU doing the right thing instead. I will not go to the Connect storage engine. And we also have done some work on Power 8, which is the new architecture from IBM. And we worked with IBM to get the improvement from here to here with a couple of months of work. So any of you are developers and wants to be part of the project, it's very easy to come in and help. We have getting more and more people in the community, adding patches, and most of the new features in 5.3 and 10.1 are actually coming from the community. So the challenge with forking, taking over a project as MySQL and doing something new. This was something that took 4 years to do. And it was lots of things that we had to build to make it working. And especially finding a business model when we couldn't do dual licensing. And we didn't have paying customers for 3 years. But, and that was the reason why eventually we merged with SkySQL to have a company that could give both support and do development in one. We also have a free documentation that anybody can be part of improving. And there's lots of people involved. So the most important things when choosing a project is to see that is it alive. And if you go to the MariaDB pages, you see we do 3 releases every month. We have lots of activity and lots of people using us. And we have some 3 million to 10 million users nowadays. And popularity is increasing rapidly. And that's a big part of, thanks to the foundation. So, and we were selected as Database of the Year in February 2016. So the reasons to switch to MariaDB today is that there's no reason to use MySQL. We are the original people. We are original people behind MySQL. We are not only doing this for money, we are dedicated to do this. And we want to ensure that whatever happens, this is free now and forever. So while we take some questions, here I have the summary what made MySQL successful. I have time for some questions, do I? And we never asked who here understands English. I hope that most of you.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. What is the status of GIS support with MySQL?
Sorry, what's the
status with GIS support for MySQL, like geospatial data?
So the person who did all the geospatial data in MySQL, he moved to MariaDB 3 years ago. We have almost the full the base standard of geo objects in MariaDB now. So we actually have more features than Postgres in this area. And currently we have that in the MyISAM and the area engine, and in 10.2 we are also moving that to the InnoDB engine. So the area engine is a future of the MyISAM engine, which is basically small, but it also crash safe, so you don't lose data. So if you need that, we actually have something that is safe to use in MariaDB.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, thank
Hello.
you for the presentation. I saw you're building your own connectors. Are you planning on building one for .NET?
It's a question that I don't think we have a .NET developer in the group yet. And so most of these connectors have been funded by customers needing those who didn't want to pay licenses. And we have a connector team of 4 people, but I don't have heard of any customer to the corporation who have wanted their .NET. So if somebody wants to build one, the foundation is happy to help. But currently I don't know if there's any plans. But there may be. If there is an interest, we will, either the corporation or the foundation together with the community will do that.
Thank you.
So I'm working part-time. I originally worked only at the foundation to ensure that we will have the freedom of existence forever, and also to ensure that people will get the trust of MariaDB. Since the start of the year, I'm also working half-time on or splitting my time between the foundation and the corporation, and to ensuring that we get the right development track on MariaDB. But whatever happens, I will always be part of the foundation to ensure that everything is done correctly, that everybody has the equal right to commit code to MariaDB, whatever happens. Because otherwise, somebody could buy us, and we'll be in the same problem again that we have with MySQL.